You're listening to the Fierce Value Podcast, episode 152, Diet Culture and Religion. I'm your host, Finny Wellsby. Let's do it! Welcome to this episode and to 2023 fatties. It's Vinny coming from Vancouver, which is the stolen, traditional, ancestral and unceded territory of the Coast Salish people, Squamish, Tsleil-Waututh and Musqueam nations. So pleased that you're here with me today. I'm recording this on the first week back from our holidays. When I say our, mine. Don't know, maybe did you have a holiday? Hope you had a holiday. If you wanted a holiday, you don't have to have a holiday. You do you. You holiday if you want to. Don't if you don't. Or maybe you can't. And I've got some of the January don't want to go back to reality, blues, sad brain stuff, as does probably billions of people. Well, 8 billion people on the planet. Let's say 7 billion people. Get that feeling. Yeah, and so I just thought, hey, if you are feeling like that, I just want to say to you and to me, to try and give myself a pep talk, that this is temporary. There will be happiness ahead. Things will change. Nothing's going to stay the same forever. And if I look back on all of the years before that I've had, it's January, all of the merriment of Christmas is over, and I'm sick of the sun going down at 4 o'clock and having like 12 seconds of daylight, and the daylight is grey daylight, and there's only 1 month in it, depending where you live in the world. January, we just need to get through January, and then the sun is going to be out for longer. Before you know it, it's going to be the summer. You're going to have experiences and fun times, and you're going to laugh and smile, and you'll even forget that January you didn't feel good. That's my hope and prediction. And I know, looking back on my times, I had it a lot worse previously. The worst one I think I remember is when I worked at a call centre. It was horrible. This call centre, and I was terrified. I was so shy, and so it made it really difficult for me to do my job, because every time the phone rang I was like, oh God, I have to talk to a human. I really didn't like doing it, and it was really strict. Like, you had to, you were monitored by the second of what you were doing. It was awful. So anyway, my life's not like that now. I have more resources to hand. I'm older and wiser, and hopefully you're older and wiser, and you have resources, or you can, I don't know, go and watch some nice happy videos on the internet, or take some drugs, or whatever. So that's my New Year's wish for you. And I thought, you know what? I don't do New Year's resolutions, but I thought, you know what? This year, I am going to refuse to try and unconsciously not breathe hard when someone's passing me when I'm climbing up a hill. You do that? I know people do this. When you're walking up a hill and someone's walking past you, and then you're just like, hold your breath, or just breathe very gently, and then they pass and you're like, thank God for that. Listen, every motherfucker is out of breath climbing up a hill, okay? That's just human bodies for you. Unless you're like some sort of hardcore hill athlete. So I think it's pretty normal to be a human being and breathe. And so I think about this, and I think it's kind of funny and also sad. But I think sometimes I recognize that I'm doing it, and I'm not realizing that I'm doing it. So I'm gonna breathe and be a sweaty bitch and all of that stuff for 2022. 2022 is for breathing and sweating, okay? And I got a card in the post which arrived from stayfat.co, stayfatdesign co on the Instagram. If you want to go to the website, stayfat.co, and the card says, "I hope I'm fat forever." So I thought that was pretty cool. So if you want a Fat Forever card, go to stayfat.co, or on Instagram, stayfatdesignco. All right, so let's get into today's episode. I've been thinking about this one for a while. I found the website dietculturetimeline.com, and some anonymous person, I messaged them on Instagram about a month ago maybe, and they didn't message me back, but I think maybe they're not as active on the gram as much. Anyway, I was like, I want to know who this is so I can credit them and tell them that I'm really inspired by their work, and so it's an anonymous person has created this dietculturetimeline.com, and I get it, being anonymous. I mean, shit, if you're a fat person talking about fatness and how critiquing fatness on the internet, I mean, shit, remaining anonymous is a very good thing for a lot of people's mental health. Anyway, and so I was, it's really detailed. You can go through, it will take you hours to go through all of the content, going back to, let's see where they go back to, like cavemen? No, I'm joking. Cavemen are like, do these jeans make my bum look big? 300 BC and up to the 2000s. So there's a lot of stuff in there, and it kind of intersects with other things that are happening in those time periods too. But there's an infographic here which talks about the history of diet culture and religion, and I've done an episode on the intersection of cults, MLMs, and was it religion that I said, or religious cults, or religious zealots, or something? Anyway, but I wanted to do a kind of a deeper dive into that juicy history, and so with this infographic, I'm gonna go read out little parts, and then I've with the information I've got from Diet Culture Timeline, I've then gone on and done extra research around specific things, as you'll see. So the history of diet culture and religion. So we can start in 800 BC, so 1200-ish years ago. So Catholicism in 800 became the reigning religion. And the diet culture impact of that was that fasting and avoiding certain foods were common on religious holidays as a form of penance. So we see this a lot in different religions, and fasting as a form of penance. And I mean, it's theoretically a good form of penance because fasting sucks, right? And so this is the beginning of that intersection of food and religion, is starting with 800 to 1600 Catholicism and fasting for penance. In 1453, Western Rome fell to the Ottoman Empire, which practiced Islam. And the impact was that the Roman Church educated its masses about Islam, stating Muhammad was indulgent of his senses, lustful, and ultimately the Antichrist. Of course they did. By the way, just a kind of like a personal bias thing here. I am not religious. I am agnostic. atheist, agnostic. I was brought up Catholic, Irish Catholic, and studied theology for A-levels. Most of my education there. One of the three subjects. It wasn't really, actually, because it led me to becoming a non-believer, which was very helpful for me because I internalized a shit ton of shame, and so that was the beginning of me beginning to let go of shame around religion. And that, so there's my biases in regards to my experiences with Catholicism were shit. And I think a lot of people's experiences with Catholicism and various religions, if they were brought up with them, is shit. But I think that if someone does believe in God or is religious, I don't personally understand it. Like, you know, I don't feel the same way as they do, but also I feel like you do you. Like, if it feels good to you, and it feels nice to think that there's God and there's Jesus or whatever religion someone practices, that's fine. I think when religion starts telling people, marginalizing people and telling people that they can't do this, and if they do, they're a bad person, unless it's things like, I don't know, murder people, then that's when religion starts to become really problematic. And a lot of people use religion as a way to hide their bigotry and sound moral about it, right? So if you're religious and you're just a cool person and God feels good for you, cool, you do you. Not my cup of tea, but whatever. But today we're talking about religion in the sense of religion that has caused harm, right? And it's not black and white, right? So Catholicism bringing in the idea of, you know, fasting doesn't mean that all of Catholicism is awful. I mean, but you know, or we're going to be talking about Protestantism, and it doesn't mean that all Protestants are, you know, believe in diet culture, or even believe that the history of Protestantism is good. Some Protestants can say this was fucked up and we don't want to do this anymore, and that's all cool. Okay, all right. So that disclaimer out the way that I should have said at the beginning. So Catholics said that Islam and Muhammad are bad because Muhammad is indulgent of his senses, lustful, and ultimately the Antichrist. 1500s, Protestant Reformation. So Protestant is an umbrella term for Baptists, Calvinists, Methodists, Pentecostals, Presbyterians, Lutherans, Congregationalists, and Adventists. And so the Protestant Reformation, we're going to go into this deeper because this is where all the juicy shit is happening. But a quick overview is that the impact here was that food became synonymous with morality. Finding pleasure in food corrupted the soul and dimmed intellect. Eating disorder behaviors were praised. Wealthy white men were developing and spreading these ideas because they could afford printing costs. Those who couldn't or wouldn't engage in these ideals were deemed inferior. So, Protestants and the Protestant Reformation. What is it? What the heck are we talking about? So, this is from National Geographic. The Protestant Reformation was a religious reform movement that swept through Europe in the 1500s. It resulted in the creation of a branch of Christianity called Protestantism, a name used collectively to refer to the many religious groups that separated from the Roman Catholic Church due to differences in doctrine. The Protestant Reformation began in Wittenberg, Germany on October the 31st. Oh, Halloween! When Martin Luther, no relation to Martin Luther King, a teacher and a monk, published a document he called Disputation on the Power of Indulgences, or 95 Theses. The document was a series of 95 ideas about Christianity that he invited people to debate with him. These were controversial because they directly contradicted the Catholic Church's teachings. I tell you what, Martin Luther from 1517 sounds like a fucking snooze fest. So basically, Catholicism was a thing, and people could kind of make penance. They could, quote, sin, make penance and still get into heaven. Whereas Martin Luther was like, bitch, I don't think so. You need to be living in a life away from indulgences. And indulgences didn't just mean food, it meant everything. Any type of fun to get into heaven, and that you couldn't buy your way into heaven if you didn't behave in a pure way. So he wasn't fun at a party. Old Marty, he'd come in, he'd be like, look at you eating a fucking canapé, going to hell. Oh, having a sip of wine, Jesus, you are basically the devil, you know. And so people would be like, Marty, can you fuck off? And so then he's like, okay, right, well, I'm going to write this stuff down. And then apparently he nailed it to the door of a church or cathedral or whatever, and it was like, hey, everyone, debate me about this stuff. And the church was pissed. The Catholic Church was like, this guy, this is not Catholicism, and we don't like you. You cannot come to our next canapé and wine party. Okay, Marty. So continuing, Luther's statements challenged the Catholic Church's role as intermediary between people and God, specifically when it came to the indulgence system, which in part allowed people to purchase a certificate or pardon for the punishment of their sins. Luther argued against the practice of buying or earning forgiveness, believing instead that salvation is a gift from God to those who have faith. Protestant reform in England began with Henry VIII in 1534 because the Pope would not grant him a marriage annulment. So, you know, good old Henry VIII, piece of shit, wants to get his dick wet with all the different wives. Hey, here's a little tip for you. If you're having a pub quiz and the question comes up of who his wives were and what their fate was, here's a little rhyme to get to remember. So he had 6 wives. The rhyme is divorced, beheaded, died, divorced, beheaded, survived. Okay, so you can remember that. Divorced, beheaded, died, divorced, beheaded, survived. So because he couldn't get a divorce, he wanted to marry his next wife after his first one. I think it was Anne Boleyn that he wanted to marry. He was like, I'm just going to make a whole new church up, the Church of England. So subsequently, King Henry rejected the Pope's authority, instead creating and assuming authority over the Church of England, a sort of hybrid church that combined some Catholic doctrine and some Protestant ideals. Over the next 20 years, there was religious turbulence in England as Queen Mary reinstated Catholicism in England while persecuting and exiling Protestants, only to have Queen Elizabeth I and her Parliament attempt to lead the country back towards Protestantism during her reign. The monarchy now in the UK, I think, is Church of England. Yes, it is. Yeah, because then when the Queen died, then Charles was then head of the Church of England. Ugh, can you imagine? All of that is wrong. Fuck the rules. Some English citizens did not believe Queen Elizabeth's efforts to restore England to Protestantism went far enough. These citizens fell into 2 groups, both labelled Puritans by their opponents. The first group, known by separatists, believed the Church of England was so corrupt that their only choice was to leave England. Around 1607, some separatists tried to start a new life. They went to Holland, but their kids were assimilating to Dutch culture too much, and they were like, these fucking kids, they're like going around with their Walkmans, or I don't know what they had, like tablets, you know, like the old time tablets, not the iPad tablets. they're becoming too Dutch. They're walking around with clogs on and they like flowers and windmills and shit. We better get back to England because they're getting influenced too much. So they went back to England, and then they were like, oh, fuck this noise. The kids here are wearing clogs too. And so by 1620, the members of the English separatist church were like, we got to get out of here. We need to start a new life, a new church. And they set sail aboard the Mayflower for New England and eventually landed near Plymouth, Massachusetts, and would be in time become known as the Pilgrims. Yes. So, Germany, UK, Henry VIII wanted to get his dick wet, so was like, okay, let's make it a thing here. And then those Brits went over to Turtle Island, now known as the United States by many, and took their beliefs with them. And their beliefs became known as the Protestant ethic. So the Protestant ethic in sociological theory is the value attached to hard work, thrift, and efficiency in one's worldly calling, which, especially in the Calvinist view, Calvinist is a branch off, were deemed signs of an individual's election or eternal salvation. And underneath all of that was hard work, thrift, and efficiency is also not indulging in things like food and sex, right? So there's this excellent piece by Leslie J. Owen, Dr. Leslie J. Owen, who wrote this before she was a doctor, but you can go read the whole thing. It's really interesting. Consuming Bodies, Fatness, Sexuality, and the Protestant Ethic. So I want to quote from here. Carnality and religion. Fatness meets sexuality and food. It may seem strange to combine sexuality, food, and religion in this discussion of fatness, but it's important to remember that the mind/body dichotomy characterized in Western values has deep roots in Judeo-Christianity, among other philosophies. This has frequently manifested in separating the body into various components, spirituality and mentality, which are connected with the divine and the afterlife, and not incidentally with masculinity and rationality, and carnality and emotionality, which focus folks on this world and are therefore corrupting and chaotic. As a result, anything connected to bodily or worldly pleasures, sex, eating, laziness, greed, becomes, at the very least, and because of the lasting influences of Judeo-Christianity in Western culture, popularly suspect. According to Judeo-Christian doctrines, including the infamous 7 deadly sins, gluttony is itself a sin against the body, a blatant elevation of the body's appetites above spirituality and godliness. In fact, authors suggest that the ambivalence between the physical necessity and the carnal appetite for food manifests in stories of Eve and her oh so tempting fruit in the Garden of Eden. While, as I mentioned, it is not historically or evangelically uncommon to connect eating and sexuality, the religious strictures against gluttony have connotations of immorality all their own. The religious connections between the excess of hungers are apparent, but fatness is also reviled in its own merits by forms of Judaism and Christianity. For a brilliant discussion of how Jewish folks have been historically linked to fatness and diabetes, see Gillum 2004. So there's a trope there and link with Jewish folks and immoral fatness and diabetes, and you can learn more about that by going to Gilman 2004 work. Continuing, but perhaps most noticeably, this word is always getting me, Protestantism, Protestantism. There seems to be too many T's. Even removing sexuality from the equation, in theory anyway, gluttony is also interwoven with several other deadly sins, most noticeably sloth, or excessive avoidance of work and physical effort, and greed or unchecked desire for something or someone. Fat individuals are not only interparate when it comes to physical hungers, but are also constructed religiously and popularly as lazy, indolent, and idle in the face of industriousness. This is another one of those rather paradoxical discourses about fatness, since it seems that people are unsure whether fat folks are driven to consume and assuage our ravenous hungers, or too passionless to do much of anything. I really like that line. Paradoxical discourses about fatness seems people are unsure whether fat folks are driven to consume and assuage our ravenous hungers, or too passionless to do much of anything. Yeah. Max Weber, a key figure in classical sociological theory, wrote a book in 1920 that touches on a number of these issues. His classic book, The Protestant Ethic and the Spirit of Capitalism, traces one of the threads of the diligent work ethic characterizing high capitalism. Oddly enough, he notes that the emergence of Protestantism coincided and coexisted quite snugly with early capitalism. I shall devote an unfortunately brief discussion to his enormously influential theory, paying special attention to how examining the Protestant ethic illuminates some of the deep-seated roots of fat phobia in Western culture, most specifically in the United States. So that bit there is, we're talking about the work of Max Weber, who is linking the Protestant ethic with capitalism. And so we've got the ethic which includes around food and not being lazy and working hard, and then the roots of capitalism being, if you want to be good or seen as good, you need to be a productive member of society, and to be productive you need to do the things, work hard, not eat, be thin, all that type of stuff. Okay, so Weber traces the Western revenants of independence back to Protestantism, paying special attention to Calvinism and its notion of predestination. According to Calvinists and several other Protestant sects, God has chosen only a limited number of persons, 144,000 to be just precise, as his total number of elect or heaven-bound. The blasphemous idea that individuals had any control over their electness challenged God's omniscience and as well as his filing system. Therefore, Calvinists accepted the rather grim notion that out of millions and now billions of people who have ever lived, only a tiny fraction will ever wander into paradise. The question then arises, why bother to exercise self-control and live a moral life when one's salvation is predestined? In response, an ethic emerged in Protestantism of proving one's electness by living a life dedicated not to worldly, read bodily, pleasures, but to God alone. Unlike Catholicism, which allowed the purging of sin through confession, Calvinist sin accumulated throughout their lives. In order to prove one's elect status, Calvinists and other Protestant sects preached living from one sin-free moment to the next. As a result, one's level of asceticism in life also served as his or her or their test of righteousness. From this individualization of salvation arose an emphasis on measuring personal behavior, read eschewing worldly pleasures, to determine one's degree of holiness. Indulging in such worldly delights as laziness, greed, and gluttony represented the height of immorality, leading to an, quote, attitude towards the sin of one's neighbour, not of sympathetic understanding, but of hatred and contempt of her or him or them as enemy of God, bearing the signs of eternal damnation. So, I mean, shit, clearly if 144,000 people are the only ones that are going to get into heaven, then you gotta be really good, considering there's now 8 billion people on the planet, and you know how many billions of people have already lived in the years that God has been around. Then I'm just thinking, like, when did God make the presence of God known according to religious people? I'm like, do they say 2,000 years ago? Is that what that? Anyway, whatever. So let's just say it's billions and billions and billions. So it means that your chance of getting into heaven are very, very low. And so instead of just being like, I'm just not gonna have dessert today, theoretically, then it's kind of like, no, every single thing has to be perfect, or I am not going to be one of the small percent that gets into heaven. And so you can see how that righteousness, that really clearly the Protestant ethic did not confine itself to religious institutions. Weber's Protestant ethic and its teachings of moderation and hard work pervade the US in such forms as the late 19th century and early 20th century temperance movement, the recent war on drugs, and the cult of healthism that has emerged within the last 25 years. Fat persons as supposed representatives of, quote, overindulgence and lassitude then violate many Americans, 91 million of whom identify as Protestant, deeply rooted values of hard work and self-sacrifice. Yeah, so it's interesting to see how, we're talking about the history here. We're going back to, hundreds and hundreds of years ago, and it's kind of like, well, we don't believe that stuff now. I mean, we're not, we don't think the same ways, and we don't hold those beliefs. And there's, 91 million Protestants in America, and how many of those Protestants are like, yeah, if I ever eat a cookie, I'm going to go to hell. It's probably a very, very small portion of those. Many of those are probably a lot more, liberal in their views compared to before. But that doesn't matter, and it doesn't matter even if you are not religious, because these beliefs and the ethics around production and who is a worthy person and morality, it's interwoven into the fabric of our current society, so much so we don't know where it comes from. We're not aware of it, we just know it is. We know deep down that we are more worthy, in quotation marks, if we work hard, if we have a thinner body, if we are not lazy, if we do not indulge, if we're not having sex with lots of different people, right? And of course, do all those things. They sound amazing. Have all the sex, eat all the food. But this is something I think about a lot, of me trying to unlearn. And we've not even mentioned me trying to unlearn all this stuff. We've not even mentioned the fact that this comes from white people who stole land and murdered indigenous communities, and indigenous communities were living in ways that are totally different from what we're describing here, right? And they didn't have the same beliefs of you need to be a productive and thin and make penance for being alive. And white folks try to wipe all of that out because we believe that the way that we thought and believed was the right way, and that without doing the things that we thought were going to save us, we would go to hell. And so it's unlearning white supremacy. It's unlearning racist ideologies. And we're not even talking about, in today's episode, about the connection between religion and anti-black attitudes, because they are totally woven together. They are hand in hand. They go, one doesn't go anywhere without the other, right? And a lot of this stuff was that white superiority, seeing black bodies and thinking, well, they are bad, they're not good like us, they are lazy and greedy and too big, and like us, we're superior because we have decided that, you know, we are not going to eat this and we're going to do that, and la la la. And if you want to learn more about that, Dr. Sabrina Strings has an amazing book that goes into, as well as Protestantism, fearing the black body, on all of this stuff, right? Sabrina Strings. Okay. The theories of American individuality, the Protestant ethics condemnation of hedonism and materialism, and the belief that fat persons are seeking gratification in ungodly places and things combine together to form a coherent picture of sizeism built on the foundations of US individualism and asceticism. This is why, as Lebesco notes, Protestants are especially intolerant of fatness, tied as it is in popular discourse to notions of laziness and overindulgence. However, this concept of fat folks as embarrassingly lazy and greedy is not confined to Christians. As Weber so brilliantly demonstrates, the Protestant ethic contributes to the work hard, now, delay gratification till later ethos, still buttressing capitalism. While its roots lie mostly in Protestantism, I would argue that the notion of working hard to get ahead in this land of endless opportunities is quintessentially capitalistic and American. It is no longer, in other words, confined to teachings from the pulpit. This explains why studies rank American as highest among industrialized nations' citizens in our negative views of fat persons, and why some authors link fatphobia's vehemence and persistence to Western notions of freedom and individuality. I do sincerely believe the Protestant ethic is more than a quaint concept from a bygone era. I think it still thrives today in the form of sin taxes, laws against vagrancy, 12-step programs, and condemnation of people regarded as slackers and carnal indulgers. This revulsion can expand to include anyone, but is consistently applied to fat folks, many people of colour, and perhaps most obviously poor people. Yes. So that piece is, that's just like, you know, one snippet from that piece, but you can go, all of the links to what we're talking about today are in the show notes, which is fiercevalley.com/152, just an FYI, 152. Okay, so that is just one section. Protestantism, which now I can say Protestantism is a big culprit. And I'm not saying Protestants are bad and that Protestantism is evil and solely responsible. But I mean, it's got a big part to play, right? And I mean, it's white people. It's white people. It's white people. It's just white. Hello, you know, hey, my ancestors. And yeah. Okay, so 1650, French King Louis the XIV, which is 10, 5 minus 4, 14. French King Louis XIV was in power and declared himself above God. XIV, is that 14? Let's Google it, just to make sure. XIV. Oh, let's see. Look, 14. Here's a little tip for you for working out those Roman numerals. X is 10, I is 1, V is 5, and so if you've got XIV, X is 10, but then the I is before the V, and if the I is before the V, it means you take 1 off 5. If the I is after the V, you add 1 to the 5. And so if you had XIIV, you would take 2 from the 5, and so it would make X10 plus the IIV, so II, 2 minus 5 is 3, makes it 13. But say if it was XVI, it would mean X10 V5 plus 1, the I, 16. Don't ask me about any of the... don't, I don't know what 20 is. 20 is probably XX. Is it? Anyway, Roman numerals for babies. Alright, so French King Louis XIV was in power and declared himself above God, as you do. What is it with these monarchs who were just like, fuck it, I'm better than Jesus? And the impact was that new ways of cooking were created, and what we think of as classic French cuisine was developed. Classic French cuisine being lots of delicious, how they say, like lots of butter and delicious bread and cheese and meat and all of that type of stuff, which is evil. So food and drink were allowed to be pleasurable. That was 1650, so 1675, taverns, tea houses, and other food and drink establishments became popular. Well, imagine before that there was, not that many taverns and tea houses. Where are you gonna pick up your Starbucks from? I mean, really. And so the impact here was these establishments and their popularity contradicted the religious messages calling for austerity and abstinence from pleasure. And the people were torn between the two. I mean, I would be. Imagine if you were in 1965 and you spent all of your life eating, like, I don't know, crackers and shit. And then there's a tea house or like a place that serves fresh bread with some butter or whatever, or ale. You'd be like, oh, give me some of that. Did you see the new tavern that's opened across the road? You'd be down there, getting shit-faced. And then the next morning, you'd be like, oh my God, I'm definitely going to hell. That would suck, right? Not, you got your first hangover, but also you're thinking that you're going to hell. I mean, thank you, Dougie. Thank you. Dougie scratching, making a little hole for himself. That's going to be guilt. Guilt. Think of all the people, though, who were like, I don't believe in that stuff. I'm just going to fucking eat some food. I'm just going to have some sex behind the inn, behind the tavern, whatever. I'm going to eat some chicken or what, They're having a merry old time. They're probably like, this is the future. Ladies and gentlemen, we are in the future. We've got our taverns. Okay, so, 1985, King Louis, again, ordered the destruction of Protestant churches, schools, and the expulsion of Protestant clergy from France. Bit mean. I mean, you should burn down the schools. I mean, Jesus. And so Protestants fled from France to neighbouring countries and to America, taking with them their austere ideals surrounding food, drink, and pleasure. So King Louis was like, get out of here. We want to eat eat butter, and we want to have sex and have fun. It was kind of mean about it. 1700s, women were now permitted to participate more in church, meaning that they were held to the church's beliefs more rigidly. Beauty became synonymous with morality, and morality meant abstinence from pleasure. Ascetic ideals included thinness. People were body shamed for not adhering to these ideals. And the thing is as well, this stuff, 1700s, and so everything about the transatlantic slave trade, 1600s, and white people being more exposed to variations in bodies, and then to be a good white woman, you have to be not like black women. 1750s, there was a growing sect of atheism. Can you imagine being an atheist in like medieval times? Imagine if you were like, this is not even medieval times, like 1750s. Is it medieval? What is medieval times? It's probably like the zeros or something, right? Medieval times. An entertainment company. Dates. When do you think it is? You have a guess, see if you're right. Medieval era, or also called the Middle Age or the Dark Ages, began around 476 AD and went from ending in 1400. There we go. 1450. There we go, see? Same. Just out of the medieval area. Imagine going back to the 1750 and being like, I'm a fucking atheist. Like, I would be too scared. If I had a time machine, I'd be going back, yep, definitely. Because what are they going to do, Well, that French king was like, we're going to burn down your churches, LOL. Have fun, guys. Like, it'd be worse if you were, like, not a white person. Didn't matter what you said, you'd be fucked. So there's a growing sect of atheism in the 1750s. While they shunned organised religion, their opinions and vernacular remained rooted in religious ideas about food and body morality. Same story, new name. Yeah, so, even though they're still, even though they are atheists, doesn't mean that they're going to unlearn all that stuff that's hundreds of years in the making, right? It's just a part of what we quote no, and why would we be any better than those people who are atheists? We have the internet and shit, and we can do research, but it just goes to show that if we don't examine these things, then they're just going to perpetuate, and the roots of it are unhelpful and harmful to a lot of people. But then it just becomes as, we all know, and I wonder about what else do I currently believe that is rooted in oppressive ideologies, pseudoscience, religious, zealot type stuff, that I'm just like, I wonder, I can't wait to find out, and be like, oh shit, oh really, Vinny, you thought this? Yeah. So that's the end of the infographic on Diet Culture Timeline, but this bullshit didn't stop in the 1750s. One guy that I particularly don't like is Sylvester Graham, who was a Presbyterian minister. So in 1830, Sylvester Graham, from Graham Cracker, or as North Americans like to say, Graham Cracker, forgetting there's an H in there, you lot. Graham Cracker, or Graham Cracker. Sylvester Graham, I guess he was North American himself, so we'll call him Graham, met William Metcalf. Reverend Metcalf was preaching on vegetarianism and promoting George Cheney's dietary advice of portion control and water therapy in the pursuit of godliness. Graham was a believer. He took these messages and used them to reinvigorate the old Protestant food morality beliefs in America. He preached that certain foods weren't just gluttonous, but were also bad for your health. Well, he didn't invent the good food, bad food dichotomy. He did proselytize it. To Graham, sugar, caffeine, meat, spices, yeasted bread, condiments, and alcohol would cause indigestion, illness, civil unrest, and lead to ungodly sexual appetites in men, including masturbation, whether married or not. No, not masturbation if you have some spices on your meat. His story sounds like the orthorexic diet culture of today, sans the sex talk. He claimed certain bad foods made his health poor as a child, and once he cut them out of his diet, he felt better. What he didn't share was that his childhood was full of trauma. By the time he was an adult, he was reportedly an exhausted and bitter person. Yeah, no shit. He's another one. Him and that other fella from like whatever, the reformer, the Protestant reformer, them two together at a party. Oh my god, imagine you were stuck there, you just walked up there too, them two were nattering away, you walked up with a glass of wine, like, hey, what are you two talking about? And they were like, oh well, I'm on this water diet, and if I only drink water then I'm gonna go to heaven. You'd be like, okay, bye. See you later, losers. He encouraged his followers to eat only bland, unstimulating food for health and morality, which he believed would make a person robust. His followers feared becoming too thin, so he had several set about to prove the naysayers wrong. For the first time in recorded history, people weighed themselves to determine if their diet caused weight loss or not. Although the intention was to not lose weight, their experiences proved that we still see time and time again with any version of restricted eating, they lost a little bit of weight initially and then gained it back or maintained the same weight. Yeah, so Sylvester Graham, and then also Kellogg's, John Harvey Kellogg. John Harvey Kellogg was a POS piece of shit. 1905, the Kellogg Company was selling about 150 cases of cornflakes per day, not counting other products. And one of their popular snacks were Graham crackers, named after Sylvester Graham. Kellogg was a fan and follower of Graham's diet recommendations. Let me go back to stuff about Kellogg. So Kellogg, early 20th century, advocates for sexual temperance. Both developed, him and Graham both developed foods to keep sexual excesses, included the dreaded masturbation and homosexuality, in check. Cornflakes, for example, were designed by J.H. Kellogg as a massive aphrodisiac, so opposite of aphrodisiac, to temper and eventually reduce sexual ardor in American men. More interesting than their introduction of these healthy foods was the public's unblinking reaction to the concept of controlling sexuality through foods. I argue this is because the links between the two run deep in Western culture. An especially salient example of such linkings occur in Aubrey's discussion of the perceived improprieties of the contemporary black bottom. In the quote, in the mind of the black upwardly mobile, the butt may connote a lack of self-analysis, a loose, unrestricted appetite for food, sex, dances like the atomic dog. It's like having a big mouth or no table manners. That's interesting. Aubrey from 2004. Let me tell you more about Kellogg. This is just a side note because Kellogg is not religious. Well, he probably was religious. Probably. In 1906, John Harvey Kellogg provided capital to help found the Race Betterment Foundation in Battle Creek, Michigan. What could this be about, the Race Betterment Foundation? This was a eugenics institution that promoted the idea that, quote, inferior peoples should not be permitted to reproduce. Fun times. Kellogg warned that if white women had one child with a black man, all her children afterwards would be part black, and this would be bad blood. Yeah. So eugenicist, racist, John Harvey Kellogg. Wonder when he died. Let's have a look. John. Oh, he was a doctor. 1943. I wonder what side he was on in World War One and World War Two. I'm going to watch some videos about this guy. This guy is getting on my tits. John Harvey Kellogg. I'm going to go into a YouTube black hole now and be like, know everything about this one guy. Also, it was either Graham or Kellogg or both of them who advocated and successfully advocated for circumcision, and because they didn't want men to masturbate, and a great way to get men to not be able to masturbate is to take away the beautiful foreskin, and obviously penis havers can masturbate without a foreskin, but their thinking was that it was not going to be as fun, and so they told people to chop off their children's part of their sex organ in order to stop masturbation. So that's fun. I mean, what is the point of being alive? No masturbation, no food, no drinking, no anything. Like, and even when I'm saying drinking, not even, I'm not even thinking about alcohol. Like, orange juice. And no having fun, no dancing, no like. Just die. I mean, really, what is the point? So moving into more recent times, we've got an article here, Purity Through Food, How Religious Ideas Sell Diets, from The Atlantic. Trigger warning there is, I mean, this is not written by pro-fat people. This is written by people who were like, diets are silly, but fat people are obviously unhealthy, LOL. So just a heads up on that. So, quote from this, foods are either natural or unnatural. They are good or bad. Bad foods harm you and good foods cleanse you. Bad foods are sinfully delicious or guilty pleasures. Good foods are whole, real, clean, and natural. Bad foods are fake, unnatural, and processed. The terms we use reflect idiosyncratic dietary faiths. The religion scholar Alan Levinovitz explains in his new book, The Gluten Lie. So this book, I guess, came out in 2015. This is when this article is from. And I presume, reading this article, that the book is about how we shouldn't be afraid of gluten, and unless you're celiac, gluten is a-okay. So the book Gluten Lie, in which he examines why people tend to put moral and religious lenses on food terminology. Much of people's relationships to food can be explained by religious patterns of thought. Our words are often more philosophical than scientific, and our words inform approaches to eating and overall well-being in deeply consequential ways. So hence that, that beginning bit, foods are good or bad, that type of thing. When Levinovitz was studying in China during the era when everyone in the US was terrified of monosodium glutamate, MSG, he talked to local people who were wholly unconcerned. MSG was everywhere, and it was fine. It was simply, Levinovitz writes in the book, a sodium salt first extracted from seaweed by Japanese scientists in 1908, and a staple seasoning in the cuisine of long-lived East Asians. But health-conscious Americans knew better. Knew better as in they didn't know better. In the States, MSG was an interloper. By the way, MSG is great. It's fine. The fear around MSG is racism. Okay? MSG makes things taste great and it's not going to kill you. Okay? So if you've been avoiding MSG because you think that, you're going to sprout a new eyeball or something, then I encourage you to go and look into Google MSG racism. Because it's, the word here, interloper, MSG being an interloper. It's racism. Continuing. I was shocked to learn that people thought sugar was bad in the late 1700s, he said, still appearing genuinely shocked as he told me when we met recently in DC. Basically, as soon as it was introduced, people said it was bad. Yeah. So imagine if you had sugar for the first time in the 1700s, this new thing, and tastes so good. You've never had sugar before. You've never had sugar before, and then you taste sugar. And then you were religious. You'd be like, oh, no, going to hell. Okay, so yes, sugar was bad even before diabetes and fatness, they use the O word, existed in the average person's mind. The reasoning? Pleasure was sinful. People blamed hypersexuality and alcoholism on sugar. Sugar was foreign. It was associated with savages who eat it. It was bad. According to James Redfield's 1852 comparative physiognomy. Okay, today there's been so many long words in this episode and I'm feeling deeply unintelligent for not knowing how to pronounce all of them, but I'm going to hope that you are giving me grace and laughing with me when these, I tell you, this is a book from 1852, okay, so who knows the word is gnome, gnome with a Y, physiognomy, okay, physiognomy. Animals that eat honey are courageous and careful, like the bee, the hummingbird, and the bear, while those that prefer sugar are not virtuous, like the housefly or the ant that lives in the sugar bowl. Even though honey is higher in fructose than the high fructose corn syrup people now love to blame for all our health problems, honey has long enjoyed a halo of naturalness. So honey is higher in fructose than high fructose corn syrup, but there's a halo. It has enjoyed a halo of naturalness. And high fructose corn syrup, people love to blame on all of our health problems, which is to say that it is not the cause of all of our health problems. It's the same halo that protects juice, but demonizes soda, even though the differences at a macronutrient level are negligible. Younger Levinovitz initially thought he'd become a bioethicist, but took to religion because of an interest in the way narratives inform beliefs. Philosophy is all about evidence and logic, but then there's religion where people just tell stories, and that was a way of convincing someone of a worldview. He assumed for a long time, like most people who haven't studied the origins of religious food traditions, that people were taught to avoid pork for rational reasons like the outbreak of trichinosis and shellfish because of food spoilage. But that biological theory was rejected by many anthropologists. Levinovitz explains, in the 1960s, Mary Douglas wrote a book called Purity and Danger, where she pointed out that most food taboos can't be accounted for by medical concerns. She makes the argument that foods were prohibited in Leviticus had to do with animals that cross boundaries. For instance, fish without scales. They were dirty not because there was some plausible biological basis for ingesting shark and getting sick. They were dirty, Levinovitz agrees, quote, because they didn't fit into a neat creation scheme. In other words, they weren't natural. Pope Francis has embodied this position in his entreaties to respect nature, at least implicitly, not to genetically modified foods. Oh, for God's sake. Genetically modified foods are fine. Everything. If you're eating an apple, it's been genetically modified. If you're eating a potato, it's been genetically modified. If someone is using genetically modified, doing genetic modification in a lab versus even in a field, it's genetic modification, right? It's like picking out the best potatoes that cropped and said, these are the ones that we want to plant again, right? Okay, so this is one of the greatest challenges of our time, he said last year, to convert ourselves to a type of development that knows how to respect creation. Did the Pope just die? No. Where the fuck did I get that idea from that the Pope died? Because the Queen died? I'm just like, yeah, okay, incumbent since 2013. I didn't say how old he is. See, oh my God, so many titles. How old is he? Nicknames, His Holiness. Anyway, whatever. Going back to this. By the way, the Pope is not dead. Okay, that was something popped into my mind. Maybe I had a dream about the Pope dying, and now I'm like, did I see a fleeting news story about that? Okay, so wrapping science around beliefs creates arguments like, in the 19th century, that interracial marriage leads to sickly offsprings. Now the same logic is used against genetically modified plants. People use biological arguments to justify the same belief that has been around since the beginning of time. New things are unnatural and dangerous. Stuff was better before. We're risk adverse and scared of new things. That makes sense from a survival perspective, but it makes for lousy science. Also, in the way now, modern days, there are lots of places and religions that do talk about how being thin and not eating a lot of food and all of that type of stuff. There's a lot of religions that teach that. I covered one in episode 125 called Food, Faith, MLMs and Cults. So it was faith. Food, Faith, MLMs and Cults from episode 125. And we talked about Gwen Shamblin. And Gwen Shamblin had a diet called The Way Down, and she had a cult, religion, but there's a hilarious, juicy, scandalous stuff that comes with Gwen Shamblin. There's a documentary called The Way Down on HBO Max or Crave if you're in Canada, talking about her life and the cult. Really good. Go watch it if you haven't already. It's called The Way Down. And anyway, so she's someone recently who is like, you need to be thin to go to heaven. To be godly, you need to put down, literally she's like, put down the Twinkie and you'll go to heaven. She has really big hair, lots of hairspray, blonde, and you know, she's a huge character. Yeah. And lots of scandal. I think was she maybe like in an LMM or something. But anyway, there's a piece called From Nexium to the Way Down. Cults really love a dangerous diet culture. So Nexium was another cult who branded women and also made them starve themselves. Because the leader had a preference for very, very thin and young looking women, that he would then have sex with. So yeah, all of this stuff is still going on now. And even if people are agnostic or atheist or whatever, it's still a part of our DNA, right? Of who makes a good person. And yeah, so Protestantism was the kind of leading force. However, many other religions have stories and rules and guidelines around thinness being close to godliness. Maybe not as much as those Protestants, and maybe not as much as today. I've not researched modern day Protestantism. I'm pretty sure that it's not like what it was. Maybe I'm wrong. Let's Google it. God in faith alone rather than a combination of faith with good works. Posits that the Bible is the sole authority, infallible authority. They reject papal supremacy, but they disagree among themselves regarding the number of sacraments, the real presence of Christ in the Eucharist, and the matters of ecclesiastical policy and apostolic succession. So it's probably not now. I mean, maybe Protestants are listening to this and being like, for fuck's sake, this is what we do now. We've got nothing to do with all of that wacky stuff we did in 500 years ago. But I'm sure some people, you know, as in within all people with faith and with not faith, there's going to be people who are spouting diet culture bullshit and people who are doing the opposite, right? So yeah. So there we have it, the overview of the history of diet culture and religion. And yeah, I wonder if what we can do to question these beliefs of laziness and I'm good or bad if I eat this, and realizing where they come from, and as well, just a reminder as well, all this stuff is deeply tied into anti-Black racism and white supremacy. And to learn more about that, go check out Dr. Sabrina Strings and her book Fear in the Black Body for that religion and anti-Black racism piece, going even more in depth on that stuff. So yeah, thanks for hanging out with me today. Links for everything that we talked about in the show notes, which is fiercefactory.com/152. I hope you're feeling, if you did have the winter blues, you're feeling a little bit better after hanging out with me today. Hopefully not worse. And I'll see you on the next episode. Okay, stay fierce, fatty.